April 1st, 2019 is a day that many people will never forget. It's the day that Justin Bachheim walked into work at RJR Maintenance and Management Company and found his boss, Robert Faulkner, lying on the shop floor, covered in a pool of blood. It's the day that paramedics arrived at what they believed was a cardiac arrest call, only to find their victim covered in stab wounds. And it's the day that Mandan police officers arrived at that same crime scene, conducted a protective sweep of the premises, and found not one, not even two, but three additional victims. William Cobb, Lois Cobb, and Adam Fuhrer. Each one covered in gunshot wounds and stab wounds. April 1st, 2019. Members of the jury, over the next several weeks, you'll hear a lot about what took place on the morning of April 1st, 2019. You'll hear firsthand stories of the people who were at the crime scene. You'll hear details of the victims' injuries. You'll hear about law enforcement's quest to identify the suspect, and you'll hear about all of the evidence that was analyzed by the crime lab. You'll also be given tangible pieces of evidence. You'll be given photos, video surveillance, bullet fragments, lab reports. Each piece of evidence that you receive in this case will be like a piece to a puzzle. And as you slowly take each one of those puzzle pieces, as you start putting them together, you'll be able to see a clear picture of what took place on April 1st, 2019. So let's start at the very beginning, and let me give you an overview of what the state believes the evidence will show in this case. One of the first people that you are going to hear from in this case is Justin Bachheim. Justin is an employee of RJR Maintenance and Management Company, and he will tell you that back in April 2019, he was a relatively new employee at RJR, who typically arrived at work at 7 o'clock in the morning. But unlike a typical Monday morning, when he arrived at work that day, he was given the shock of a lifetime when he walked in the building. His boss, Robert Faulkner, was lying on that shop floor, covered in a pool of blood, completely unresponsive. Justin will tell you how he quickly jumped into action, how he called 911, how he waited for that ambulance to arrive, and how he began CPR. Then you'll start hearing from the first responders, from the paramedics and the firefighters who arrived on scene. Those paramedics, the ones that thought they were coming to a cardiac arrest call, only to find their victim covered in stab wounds. I expect those paramedics to tell you that as soon as they ripped open Robert's shirt and saw the stab wounds to his chest, they knew they were not dealing with a cardiac arrest call and that something was seriously wrong. You'll also hear from several Mandan police officers, the ones who responded to a 911 call, arrived on scene, and realized that that scene was not secure. I expect those officers to tell you that they conducted a protective sweep of the premises to ensure that the suspect was not on scene. While each of those officers will tell you about their personal experience on scene that morning, each one will confirm that there was no suspect located on scene, and that instead, they found 3 additional victims. After you hear from those first responders, the testimony in this case will begin to shift to the next phase of witnesses, the initial investigation team. You'll not only hear from Mandan police officers and detectives, but you'll also hear from special agents with the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, or BCI, who came in to provide additional assistance. During the testimony of those witnesses, you will be able to see video of the crime scene. You'll also be able to see an electronic virtual recreation of the crime scene, and you'll be able to listen to a detailed blood pattern analysis. On more than one occasion, you're going to have the opportunity to hear from Special Agent Joe Arends, the lead case agent in this case, who will also be sitting at prosecution table. He'll tell you his experience when he first arrived on scene and how BCI worked together with the Mandan Police Department to launch an investigation, to analyze the crime scene, and to begin collecting evidence. After you hear the details of that initial investigation, we'll start moving into the autopsy section. At that stage, you'll hear from Dr. William Masello III, the medical examiner who conducted the autopsy on all 4 victims. He'll walk you through each one of those autopsies, and he'll be able to outline the injuries that the victims sustained. Then this case will shift into the process investigators took in order to identify the suspect. As you will learn, investigators used video surveillance in order to help them identify the suspect from RJR as the defendant, Chad Isaak. RJR had video cameras that captured the suspect arriving and leaving RJR on the mornings of the murders. That gave investigators the approximate height, size, and build of the suspect. Then investigators received a tip from Angela Davis, an employee at McDonald's located only a few blocks from RJR. On the morning of the murders, Angela saw an individual matching that description of the suspect walking towards McDonald's from the vicinity of RJR. Angela will testify during this trial, and I expect her to tell you that that individual caught her attention because he was wearing a full balaclava-type face mask in April when it wasn't cold outside. Investigators then began to collect video surveillance from various businesses located on Memorial Highway near the vicinity of RJR and McDonald's. Several of those surveillance systems provided additional videos to law enforcement, showing the suspect traveling to RJR, using an RJR vehicle as he left and fleeing the scene. Ultimately, investigators will use those surveillance videos to show you how they followed the suspect's arrival route and exit route on the morning of the murders. They will also show you how they used photos to locate that suspect vehicle in Washburn, North Dakota, and how they were able to identify it as a white Ford pickup belonging to the defendant, Chad Isaak. Which then brings us to the next phase of this case, search warrants. 3 separate search warrants were obtained in this case. The first for the defendant's residence, the second for his personal vehicle, his truck, and the third for his office. You'll hear testimony from several BCI agents in this case who will talk about those searches, and they will tell you all of the evidence that they found. Finally, we'll move into the lab section. You'll hear from several forensic scientists, some with the North Dakota Crime Lab here in Bismarck, North Dakota, and some from the ATF lab out in Maryland. Those experts will be able to explain to you the various analyses that were conducted in this case, including a footprint analysis, a firearms analysis, and a fiber analysis. Ultimately, they will be able to explain to you how all 3 of those analyses once again confirmed that the suspect from RJR was the defendant, Chad Isaak. That's what the state believes the evidence will show in this case. At the conclusion of this trial, once you have heard all of the testimony, once you have received all of the evidence, you will know what happened on April 1st, 2019. You will know who broke into RJR. You will know who used an RJR vehicle during his escape. And you will know who caused the murders of Robert Faulkner, of William Cobb, of Lois Cobb, and of Adam Fuhrer. Which is why the state will come back up before you and will ask you to find the defendant, Chad Isaak. guilty. Thank you.
Mr. Quick?
Yes, Your Honor. Our deputy here is set up. Just keep the screen on.
Gotcha, when the TV's on.
May it please the court, counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury.
Can you pull the microphone closer, please?
We agree that with the government that this is an absolutely horrible crime, unprecedented perhaps in Morton County and rare even for the entire state of North Dakota. Many of the facts in this case will be undisputed. 4 people died with homicidal violence. But this is not a case about what happened. This is a case about who did it. And to determine who did it, you need to determine why. There is no why for Dr. Chad Isaak. And when you look at the facts, this case quickly unravels. There was tremendous pressure to solve this case on all levels of law enforcement, from the public, from the local, state, and even national media. Mandan Police Department, in response, issued daily press releases and held daily press conferences. The public was constantly assured that no one else was in danger, that this crime was, quote, specific to the victims involved, and, quote, a later release called the crime a, quote, targeted, isolated incident, end quote. This case is a rushed to judgment based on erroneous information that led to erroneous conclusions. There's a phrase now used often in the information age called confirmation bias. That's where we subconsciously favor information that confirms our preformed opinions. We overlook or dismiss information that opposes our viewpoint. That's exactly what happened in this case. What is RJR? RJR Maintenance and Management is a company that manages and maintains property owned by others. The company was owned by Robert Faulkner, now deceased, along with his wife, Jackie. They purchased the company in 2011 and took it over in 2012. When the company was purchased in 2019, it had 3 employees and less than 400 rental units. It grew to over 30 employees and over 3,000 units in 2019. In November of 2017, they actually moved into a new building, the building where these crimes occurred. The building was owned by Robert, wife Jackie, and Deanna Finney, Robert's sister, and the office supervisor. Most of the employees lived in Bismarck, Mandan, but the Cobbs, 2 victims here, lived in the community of Judson and drove to work together each day. William Cobb was the shop manager, and he was responsible for setting up maintenance and cleaning crews. Lois did accounts receivable and billing and other office functions. Robert Faulkner and William Cobb shared an office at RJR. Adam Furrer had worked at RJR for 6 years. He did maintenance and remodel jobs, often working alone. This was a successful business by all indications, but not popular in all circles. RJR averaged 5 to 6 evictions per month, which would be a total of over 200 over 3 years. RJR employees gave law enforcement a list of 30 people that were not just evicted, but specific suspects because they were determined to be upset residents. RJR would often auction off their property. If it was a storage unit, for example, they would change locks, they would sue people, and they routinely evicted families. Several possible suspects were identified by several employees during the early investigation. A list of pending lawsuits was also provided by the staff to law enforcement during the early days, which was 55 pending lawsuits as of April 2nd, 2019. Robert Faulkner handled most of the evictions and other court proceedings, for example, lawsuits for damages to property, etc. And if a tenant needed to be physically removed from a property that RJR managed, Robert and William Cobb would often go together. Both carried handguns. Lois Cobb and Jackie Faulkner had handguns as well. Employees were also terminated regularly. Deanna Finney admitted that William Cobb and Robert could be hard on employees and also gave law enforcement a list of former disgruntled employees as possible suspects. So who is Dr. Chad Isaak? Law enforcement has mammoth resources now to investigate anyone. Some of these are public searches, many are not. Law enforcement can determine every address we've ever lived at, every job, our criminal history, which could include an arrest, a conviction, any call we make to a police department, whether we were a victim of a crime, traffic tickets, financial information, including bankruptcies, lawsuits, driver's license issues, any other licenses that you might have, a professional or occupational license, vehicles that you own, firearms that you may have purchased, and much, much more. All this is available largely through a few computer strokes. What did the law enforcement officers find doing this sort of investigation about Dr. Isaak? Nothing incriminating. He was born in 1974, he's now 47 years of age, raised in small town North Dakota, Hazen, Pick City, educated at North Dakota schools, graduated from high school in Riverdale, North Dakota. Joined the Navy after high school and was stationed in Texas, Hawaii, and Nevada. Honorably discharged in November of 1999, awarded a Good Conduct Medal and National Defense Service Medal. Married, divorced, now has one adult daughter that lives in Hawaii. His parents, also divorced, both live in North Dakota. Chiropractor in Washburn, North Dakota, been in business for approximately 13 years when this offense was alleged. No criminal history of any kind, either in the military or civilian world. No bankruptcies, no lawsuits, nothing of any consequence to make him a suspect in any crime, much less a crime of this magnitude. Height and weight. When he was arrested in this case on April 4th in McLean County, where Washburn is located, he was measured and weighed, and he was 6 foot 4 inches tall, and at that time, 220 pounds. That'll become relevant as we talk about the crime. So how did Dr. Isaak's life intersect with RJR? In a very marginal way. Dr. Isaak and many others lived in a mobile home and RV park in Washburn called North View Estates. Chad actually moved into this North View Estates in October of 2012. He signed a tenant agreement with then owners Tom Link and Mike Nelson. They managed their own park at the time. They didn't hire a professional manager. And Dr. Isaak would often move snow in the park in the winter for no pay. A new owner named Rolf Edgars came in and bought the park in 2018. He then hired RJR to manage the property. All tenants, including Dr. Isaak, received a couple of letters, one from the previous owners and one from RJR. Both letters advised them that RJR would now be managing the property, requesting the residents fill out a short questionnaire, but basically there were no real changes and no increase in lot rent. Dr. Isaak promptly returned his questionnaire and a separate form required by RJR entitled Animal Agreement, which allowed him to keep his dog, which was a black lab. They had a policy that there were certain dogs believed to be too aggressive to be allowed. A black lab was not one of them. In early August 2018, there was a Meet the Managers meeting in Washburn. This was RJR's first RV park. They had managed other mobile home parks, but this was a combination RV and mobile home park, and they wanted to make a good impression with the tenants. Dr. Isaak was at work, was unable to attend this meeting, but several RJR employees went to Washburn and met with most of the tenants in the park, answered any questions that they might have had. Shortly thereafter, a month or two in the fall of 2018, Robert Faulkner went back to Washburn, and he was at the Meet the Managers meeting as well, and at that time met Dr. Isaak, had a pleasant conversation about possible snow removal and that he had been doing for free. That's the only real contact that Dr. Isaak had with RJR. He paid his rent by credit card, always early, always by phone. He had never been to the RJR properties in Mandan. He had never met Lois or Bill Cobb, Adam Furr, or any other RJR employees, except for a couple of conversations with marketing person Ben Pace and a handshake conversation with Robert Furr in the fall of 2018. RJR employees had occasional trips to Washburn as they were managing the property, and they would have a document prepared because they would bill the owner every time they went to Washburn. RJR employee Don Elison was assigned responsibilities for the park. He collected rent for those that didn't pay online and handled any issues. There really were no issues with this mobile home park, RV park, and certainly nothing involving Dr. Isaak. Numerous employees were interviewed and had never seen Dr. Isaak before, and they had had no communication with him. On March 27th, 2019, some 7 months later, after RJR took over management of this park, a tenant, not Dr. Isaak, emailed the office about a possible water issue in the park, probably snowmelt. Jackie Faulkner received that message, responded that her husband Robert and others would be up there the next day, on March 28th. On March 28th, Robert, William Cobb, and other employees went up there to address any issues that might exist. They had no contact or communication with Dr. Isaak. 3 days later, we're at April 1st, 2019. Horrible day. I don't disagree with the government one bit. The government outlined some of the tragic events of that day, but they omitted crucial facts. April 1st was a Monday morning, and several RJR employees work early. That day was no exception. About 7:20 in the morning, 3 employees, Brian Slate, Justin Bachheim, and Kyle Hagan, all arrived about the same time in separate vehicles, and they were all kind of parked in front of the office. Adam Furr's vehicle was already there. and Robert Faulkner's vehicle was already present. But Cobb's vehicle, William and Lois drove an RJR company vehicle. They were usually the first people there in the morning. Their vehicle was not there. Justin Bachheim went into the office first while the other two people were still sitting in the car drinking coffee or having a cigarette. He walks in and discovers Robert face down in the shop. And as the government indicated, he initially believed this was a medical emergency. He calls 911, indicates the person is not responding, the person's not breathing, and then he's told to turn Robert over and began CPR, which is what he does. No other victims are discovered at this point. Within minutes, 3 minutes to be exact, the first Metro ambulance arrives with a medic named Tanner and an EMT person whose last name is Williams. Both are going to testify. The EMT immediately takes over the CPR that was being done by employee Justin. Several RJR employees are now present in the building and watching in stunned silence. A fire truck arrives as they all get this 911 message. In fire truck number 1, there's at least one fireman there named Derek Berger, perhaps two. They immediately assist with this resuscitation effort on Robert. The first Mandan police officer, Officer Tessness, arrives within minutes, and he assists as well. Immediately followed by fire truck number 2. There's 2 firemen in that truck, one of whom will testify, Mr. Schaff. Mr. Schaff, at one point when he was interviewed in this case, said, and this was probably after they discovered the 2 of the additional bodies, quote, "We were all kind of like deer in the headlights," end quote. He also went on to say, "It took a few minutes to get our wits together," end quote. A few minutes later, several additional Mandan Police Department officers arrive in separate cars, Officers Henry and Officers Stepp. It is now determined this obviously is not a medical scene, this is a crime scene. So they promptly call for detectives and other police officers. At some point, it's determined that there's 2 more victims in the actual office area. Robert was in this shop area, and you'll see not only video, but lots of diagrams and photographs outlining the business. The office area is separate from the shop. In the office area were Bill and Lois Cobb. They were found close to each other. When they find that there's more victims, the first Metro ambulance on the scene calls for another ambulance, which responds as well. You now have 4 rescue vehicles with 7, perhaps 8 people, plus law enforcement and several RJR employees that are in the crime scene. Law enforcement, as they arrived, and the emergency responders quickly realize that the crime scene has not been secured. So the rescuers stop their efforts until the scene is secure, and they actually leave the building for some time. The 3 Mandan police officers who had arrived at separate times draw their guns and check the scene. During this process, they discover a 4th body, Adam Furr, who's actually in the shop area just a few feet away from Robert, but on the other side of kind of a floating barricade. During this securing of the scene process, 2 locked doors are kicked open. No other bodies, fortunately, were found, and no suspects were present. Several Mandan police officers now, who have been notified that this is a crime scene, and detectives have arrived and entered, as have additional RJR employees, Jackie Faulkner, the wife of Robert, and Deanna Finney, Robert's sister. RJR employees that arrived after that and have not entered yet are basically told to remain outside, and they will be interviewed, and most are interviewed by Mandan Police Officer Bowman. RJR employee Justin Bachheim, the one that did the 911 call and the initial CPR efforts on Robert, was allowed to wash his hands in the company bathroom before leaving. Another employee, Jason Kraus, had come into the building, put his lunch bag down in the shop, and later has to have that retrieved for him. Robert's wife, Jackie, and Deanna Finney were allowed to watch some of the initial heroic rescue efforts on Robert. Jackie had been scheduled to go to Las Vegas that day, as was RJR employee Ben Pace. Inside the building, multiple police officers now walked through the crime scene, viewing the bodies. At this time, the senior detective from Mandan on site, Lieutenant Haug, decides to call the BCI. The BCI, the North Dakota State Crime Bureau, is an organization that has statewide police powers. They are geographically dispersed throughout the entire state of North Dakota, largely in the bigger geographical cities. There's over 20 agents now that work for the Crime Bureau. There's several in Bismarck, Minot, Jamestown, etc. Lieutenant Haug, needing the assistance of the Crime Bureau, calls and asks for 6 to 8 agents. The first 3 agents, who are local, arrive at 9:15 a.m., nearly 2 hours after the initial 911 call. Keep in mind they weren't called right away. The 911 call was about 7:20. 5 other Crime Bureau agents that are not in Bismarck arrive before noon. A search warrant is requested to do the crime scene investigation at RJR, but many law enforcement had walked through the crime scene before the search warrant arrived. A crime scene entry log was not started until 9:47 a.m., which is obviously after the Crime Bureau got involved. What is a crime scene entry log? A crime scene entry log is something that's maintained where every person that comes into a crime scene writes down their name. They make sure they're wearing proper clothing. They're making sure that every person that comes in the crime scene is identified. That wasn't started until 9:47. 21 people were on the crime scene log from 9:47 a.m. until they finished the crime scene investigation late evening, about 8:30. They made no real effort to document, on this log at least, those that had entered the crime scene before. But clearly, it was 7 or 8 fire and ambulance people, 5 or 6 RJR employees, probably more, 11 or more Mandan Police Department officers, primarily higher-ups, including the deputy chief. No crime scene precautions were taken by these early people that were there. They weren't wearing booties over their shoes. They were not wearing special clothing. I presume that they weren't even wearing gloves. So at this point, the crime scene is turned over to the Crime Bureau, the BCI. BCI attempts to recapture scene integrity inside the building and outside the building. They set up perimeters a block or two away because they're looking for tire tracks and footprints, and they want to make sure that nobody is milling around even outside, although that takes some while to get established. They take hundreds of photographs. They do a video. They do drone flights on April 1st and again on April 3rd. You're going to hear all sorts of bells and whistles now that go into a crime scene investigation. Total station mapping, specialized cameras, 3D scanners. They sees all sorts of evidence. In all, on the crime scene site itself, they seize 50 items of evidence, including apparent blood swabs, clothing items, keys, glasses, bullets or bullet fragments of spent bullets, cell phones of the victims, presumably, iPad, among other things. These items are seized by various Crime Bureau agents and given to the Mandan Police Department for safekeeping and eventual transport to crime labs for analysis. And there was more than one crime lab involved, and we'll talk about that as we go through this. As the government has indicated, RJR did have cameras in certain locations inside and outside of this new state-of-the-art building. The RJR videos showed, when they were viewed, the arrival of all 4 victims, and they also show what law enforcement now believe to be a one-person suspect. But the times and the conduct are incredibly short for one suspect. William and Lois Cobb, who are always the first arrivers, even though they live in the country, they arrive and they're viewed on the camera standing outside smoking at about 6:38 a.m. The next relevant image is a person wearing a heavy orange coat with an orange face mask entering the building on camera at 6:47 a.m. Approximately 6:52, 5 minutes later, after you see a person wearing orange walk in, you see a person wearing orange come out the same door, exits off camera, presumably walks somewhere, and then re-enters a short time later. Then you see a video of this person walking inside of RJR. Then you see the person come back to that same door, opens the door, looks outside, and then re-enters the building at about 6:54 a.m. Adam Furr arrives at 7:01 and is seen entering the business by this outside camera. At 7:06, Robert arrives and enters the business. 2 minutes later, 7:08, a person wearing either white or orange, and hopefully there'll be an explanation why we can't determine that color, wearing a face mask and a coat, leaves RJR, walking. There's no obvious evidence of blood visible on the image of this person, either dressed in white or orange. Altogether, this solo suspect that law enforcement now believes was in the building from 6:47 to 7:08, a total of 21 minutes. But if law enforcement conclusions are correct that this is a one-person crime, and you subtract the time where he's seen walking and looking outside and walking outside presumably, that left 5 minutes to kill both Cobbs and 7 minutes to kill Adam and Robert. Total of 12 minutes. The autopsies are awful. They show that Bill Cobb was shot 4 to 8 times. They can't determine the amount of times, and stabbed 28 times. Lois Cobb was shot an undetermined amount and stabbed approximately 48 times. Adam Furr was shot 3 times, stabbed 11 times. Robert Faulkner was apparently not shot at all, but stabbed in excess of 20 times. The stab wounds alone on these 4 victims was in excess of 100 stab wounds. RJR cameras on the inside of the building does not show any of the crimes, and it only shows a person, and you can't determine age, gender, race, or ethnicity walking in the shop area. It's as if the person walking inside of RJR was aware of the camera locations. The person is wearing black pants, a heavy orange coat, and an orange face mask. By now, RJR employees have basically all arrived. The ones that don't have the early morning responsibility arrive shortly before 8 o'clock. They're told to wait outside, and most are interviewed by Mandan Police Department officers. Several have suggestions immediately of possible suspects. 2 employees, Mitch Kessel and Kyle Hagan, flee in Hagan's vehicle after being advised by law enforcement that all RJR employees are required to wait and be interviewed. They eventually came back and were detained in the back of a squad car. And we'll come back to Mitch Kessel towards the end of this presentation. I mentioned earlier that the Cobbs drive a company vehicle to work every morning, and that vehicle was not there. That was discovered about 2/10 of a mile away at Indigo Signs. Law enforcement later believed that the suspect may have driven the vehicle there, parked, and left. Let me get that up. You can see towards the bottom, now to the left, RJR is to the bottom left. Indigo Signs is pretty much straight north, maybe a little northeast, just a short distance from RJR. So law enforcement believes, even though they didn't see the suspect get into the RJR vehicle, they believe the person must have done that, driven it to Indigo Signs, parked, and then left. This vehicle, I'll call it the Cobb vehicle to not confuse it with other RJR vehicles, is secured by law enforcement, but not before some trace evidence blows away. The Crime Bureau agents do seize one item, and they tape up the doors of the Cobb vehicle to preserve other remaining evidence, and they load up the Cobb pickup in a trailer and haul it to the Crime Bureau offices for further search, which is done the next day, April 2nd. About 10 o'clock that morning, the news is already buzzing with this horrible crime. A McDonald's employee that the government has already identified as Angela Davis calls and says she has possible information. So one of the Mandan police officers, who was actually one of the first responders, is asked to go and interview Miss Davis. She says, and this is very fresh in her mind, this had just happened that morning, saw a person in a ski mask enter a white, newer Ford pickup, maybe a 250, an F-250, in their parking lot at about 7:20-ish in the morning. The person was wearing a camouflage ski mask, not an orange ski mask, a black sweater, blue jeans, 5 foot 8 inches tall, and medium build. The next day, she's re-interviewed, this time by a detective, and she basically states the same thing, but having thought about it overnight, she said, I think it was black jeans, not blue. The person was clearly wearing boots, and confirmed the height at 5 foot 8 or 5 foot 9. She also indicated that she saw another person at that same time walking in the same area that she only described as a, quote, Indian guy, end quote. She did think it could have been a 4-door pickup. She thought the person could be male, but the face was not in any way visible because of the face mask. At this point, law enforcement attempts to find video evidence up and down Memorial Highway, and they do find some success. The government now suggests that they have continuous surveillance of the same person from McDonald's to RJR in the morning, starting at 5:22 a.m., and back to the pickup in the McDonald's lot at 7:22 a.m. And this, just to orientate you to Memorial Highway, shows several of the businesses along the way. You'll see Indigo Signs, and in the top left corner, you will see McDonald's. And so the belief by law enforcement is this person somehow goes from RJR, steals a truck, goes to Indigo Signs, and then walks that mile distance to eventually McDonald's, where he or she is seen by Angela Davis at McDonald's. Well, there's many problems with this theory, both coming to RJR and going from RJR. Let's talk about going to RJR. There will be lots of video evidence in this case. There's many, many gaps in this video narrative, from coming from McDonald's allegedly to going to RJR. There's a gap of at least 11 minutes in one case, an hour gap in another case. In addition to that, when you look at the videos from these various businesses along Memorial Highway, you'll see 2 other people on the videos during this time frame who are never identified and never interviewed. And that's not counting the possible third one identified by Angela Davis, the McDonald's employee. In addition to these gaps in time and these 2 or other 3 people seen walking in the area, the person that is seen entering RJR at 6:47 a.m. is dressed differently from the person observed before at McDonald's when they find that tape. There are similar problems with the person leaving RJR at 7:08 a.m. The person leaving is either wearing white or orange. The person is not seen leaving the Cobb vehicle at Indigo signs. There is no video showing anybody leaving the Cobb vehicle at Indigo signs. If it is the suspect, and that probably makes sense, the person could have gone in any direction. Law enforcement assumes the person went west because it fits their theory. The person could have gone any of the other 3 directions. After another gap of several minutes, law enforcement sees on some cameras a person now wearing dark clothing and a dark face mask. These videos are in color. It's not an orange face mask, and there's other time gaps as well before the McDonald's scene described by Miss Davis, with the person ultimately leaving in the white Ford truck about 7:20 a.m. Several Crime Bureau and Mandan police officers and perhaps others now canvass the exterior of RJR looking for evidence. Many photographs are taken of tire tracks and footprints. The soil was particularly susceptible to excellent prints. It was April 1st. We have a melt. The soil is soft and imprint is very visible. The area is canvassed eventually from Indigo signs to McDonald's. And they continue that canvassing on April 1st, April 2nd, and April 3rd. Later on April 1st, 2019, the coroners are called, the bodies are eventually removed, and the crime scene log ends on April 1st at 8:35 p.m. The day ends with a press release from the Mandan Police Department that concludes there is no reason, based on the information we have, that the public is in any danger. April 2nd. Apparently recognizing the missteps from the day before, it's decided that the Crime Bureau agents will re-interview all of the RJR employees that had been interviewed the day before. Several additional Crime Bureau agents are requested and show up in Bismarck, Mandan. There's now 21 Crime Bureau agents working this case on site locally. That's nearly the entire state department. At least 3 of the agents are assigned to process the Cobb vehicle that had been taken by a truck to the Crime Bureau offices. There was 1 item seized on April 1st before the transport from the front door handle. There was no photograph taken of that 1 item, and that 1 item was misplaced for several weeks before it was discovered in mid-May 2019, presumably put in with other evidence from the RJR crime scene. 19 additional items are taken from the Cobb pickup on April 2nd. 6 swabs from the driver's door, 3 swabs from the passenger door, additional swabs from the driver's armrest, steering wheel, steering column, gear selector, and center console. There's also some fibers that they take by putting basically Scotch tape in the vehicle and trying to seize them that way from the armrest. 2 sets of keys and a handgun belonging to William Cobb is also seized. They also have several fingerprints visible on both the passenger and driver's door of the Cobb vehicle. It's spring, it's dirty, and you can see fingerprints on the pickup, and they attempt to secure those fingerprints as well. Law enforcement begins to interview witnesses on Memorial Highway. They discover a person named Dave Miller, who worked at Armstrong Sanitation. They re-interview Angela Davis, the lady from McDonald's. They also do the first 2 autopsies on April 2nd of William and Lois Cobb. 11 pieces of evidence are seized from Lois, primarily clothing items. 17 items are seized from William, primarily clothing, but also 2 bullets as well. At this point, law enforcement issues a BOLO. A BOLO stands for Be on the Lookout, and that is sent out by a statewide organization called the North Dakota State and Local Intelligence Center. It's sent out to all law enforcement in North Dakota. They're trying to identify a person and a vehicle of interest in these crimes. The photo that they use comes from the RJR camera, and the picture of the pickup allegedly comes from one of these businesses on Memorial Highway. Law enforcement is frankly unsure where to look, even if they assume that the suspect that leaves RJR, goes to Indigo Signs, is the same one that ends up at McDonald's. One of the Mandan detectives, Detective Graves, he calls the port of entry at the Canadian line to check if a white truck matching this general description could have crossed over the border. They're looking at this point for a white, approximately 2004 to 2008 Ford F-150 extended cab pickup. Very poor quality photograph is on this BOLO, which was taken from one of the neighboring businesses. It allegedly shows rust on the driver's side rear wheel fender. There's also on this BOLO a very poor quality photo of a person, not necessarily a male, a person wearing orange, and a separate photograph of the person wearing white. Hooded sweatshirt, dark pants, dark shoes. And they specifically indicate on this Be on the Lookout that the shoes have the number 95 on them. This is the first page of the BOLO. If we can highlight the bottom, make that larger perhaps. And then if you can remove that, you can see the photographs above, very, very poor quality, very difficult to determine anything. And then the page 2 of the BOLO has some additional language about the shoes. The person of interest was seen wearing an orange hooded sweatshirt, dark pants, dark shoes, with 95 printed on the shoes. April 2nd ends with the Mandan Police Department issuing a press release that said, "This investigation so far leads us to believe this incident was specific to the victims involved. We do not believe the public at large is in any danger." April 3rd. April 3rd, 2019. Law enforcement now starts the process to obtain cell phone location information. Some of you might be surprised during this trial what information of yours that is not private, most of it, to be honest. They try to get cell phone location information from the cell towers in the area. It's a laborious process, but can identify anyone in the area by any computer device, cell phone, iPad, etc., presumably even if they're not even turned on. Federal court issued court orders for 3 cell towers for 3 separate providers: Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile. At this time, law enforcement also drafts what are called preservation requests, requesting the Facebook folks to retain information until they can get a search warrant or consent, because they want to look at everybody's Facebook of the victims and also Jackie Faulkner. They're trying to identify people with motive. April 3rd also brings the autopsies of Adam Furr and Robert Faulkner. 13 items of evidence are taken from Robert, primarily clothes. 14 items of evidence are taken from Adam, primarily clothes, plus 2 bullets. Fingerprints and fingernail clippings are taken from all 4 victims. Crime Bureau now continues with the interviews of the RJR employees that they had started on April 2nd. They interview multiple RJR employees or family members. The interviews are thorough and probing as to possible suspects and motives. They interview Ben Pace, who's one of the senior leaders, one of the marketing directors. He identifies many persons with possible motive. He gives specific tenants' names. He gives specific problem properties by location. He identifies a couple people involved in a lawsuit that were pretty emotional about that. He also identifies several former employees that could have been angry enough. And he also identifies a person, specific kind of to Mr. Pace, that was been released from prison on March 30th, 2019, who had called Pace, accusing him of being an informer, causing this guy to go to prison. So he identifies that person as well. Another employee, Karen Bierke, stated that several RGR employees were often confronted with people during their normal work responsibilities pointing firearms at them. Justin Bachheim, the person that made the 911 call and did the heroic efforts on Robert, he was interviewed. He identified a couple possible suspects. He identified a tenant by name that while he was repairing her dryer, specifically expressed hatred for Robert, William, and Lois Cobb. And this was while he was fixing the person's dryer. He described a separate incident in January of 2019, some 3 months before this crime, in which a tenant pointed a gun at him. Thomas Faulkner, the son of Robert, stated that his father was threatened numerous times because of evictions and removal of tenants. Deanna Finney, sister of Robert, part owner of the building, believed it was a past residents who had been removed from their home. One employee suggested retaliation for a drug task force raid that had occurred in one of the properties managed by RJR. Another employee even suggested that someone at RJR had a party the weekend before and members of a local motorcycle club were kicked out, suggesting retaliation. Law enforcement considered all of these relevant and worth pursuing initially. They also collected the lists of the lawsuits, the list of the primarily disgruntled tenants, and former employees. Nearly all the employees interviewed in these early days noted upset tenants and high employee turnover. All of this was considered viable leads, but all but ignored after Dr. Isaak was arrested. Back to the white pickup. At this point, law enforcement has viewed some additional videos from additional businesses not located on Memorial Highway going west into Mandan. They believed that the McDonald's white pickup that they now suspect may have traveled west and then ultimately north. But there's really no additional attempts to determine if the truck, if indeed this is the only suspect, went in a different direction. There's at least one video that shows multiple white trucks on it. But ultimately, there's a video seen in Center, North Dakota, showing a white pickup. So another bolo, be on the lookout, goes out to law enforcement on April 3rd, asking law enforcement to look for video on various roads near Center, North Dakota. They identify a County Road 48, an additional highway as well. They essentially continue with the same description, shoes with the number 95 on there, the same photographs essentially, but they're now looking for information near center. No attempt is made to contact the North Dakota Highway Department to determine the number of similar trucks at this time frame in North Dakota. Had they done so, they would have discovered there were 3,325 white F-150 trucks between 2004 and 2008, which is the year they put on these two bolos. They could have drilled down further if they wanted to just regionalize the search and discovered there were 317 in McLean, Mercer, Oliver, Morton, and Burleigh counties alone. They could have run these lists of white Ford One pickups and compared it to people with similar trucks that had a motive or were disgruntled with RGR. That's never been done. On April 3rd, there was another press release. The pressure on law enforcement from the concerned public and the media grew. On this press release, they indicated, quote, "We want to reiterate that we do not feel the public is any danger. This is a targeted, isolated incident." But that same day, the Mandan Police Department does respond to this pressure and establishes a 24-hour tip line. And people are encouraged to call with any and all information. That's on April 3rd. On April 4th, another press release. The day begins with a release trying to tamp down rumors. As the headline says, the Mandan police respond to public rumors surrounding the homicide. And then they say, we know there's a lot of rumors being spread, misinformation, we're doing the best we can, essentially. Be patient. But you can sense the frustration, you can sense the intensity and pressure. At this point, an attempt to find what they believe to be the white truck, Mandan Police Detective Haug contacts one of the federal officials asking that person to travel to several towns, Stanton, Pick City, Riverdale, to look for video. He also contacts the North Dakota Highway Patrol and asks if they will do drone surveillance in the area of Center to look for a white pickup or evidence. This apparently was not done. Again, no one attempts to contact the Highway Department to determine owners of white Ford pickups and cross-reference them to people with possible motive, many of whom have already been identified. Enter McLean County. What does happen is a deputy in McLean County looks at these bolos and thinks the truck could belong to his chiropractor in Washburn. He takes a picture of his chiropractor's white Ford truck, sends it to the crime bureau, and now everyone thinks this is the person responsible. But even before this can be acted upon later on April 4th, it was discovered in the morning of April 4th that victim Robert Faulkner had a girlfriend. It was discovered either through an RJR employee or perhaps information from Robert's phone that he had had a long-term relationship with a woman by the name of Lisa Nelson. She was interviewed on April 4th and admitted to a 15-year relationship. That interview occurred before any of the search warrants were issued and executed in Washburn on April 4th. She indicated she was divorced because of Robert, that her ex-husband was violent, had prior criminal conduct, had been issued a restraining order many years even after the divorce occurred. Wife Jackie Faulkner was ultimately interviewed about that, but that occurred in late April. She denied knowing anything about that. But another former RJR employee stated that she heard Jackie state that she would never divorce Robert if he was having an affair because she would have him taken care of. She later admitted making that statement, but denied that it had any criminal intent. Despite the knowledge of this affair, despite no labs yet being returned on any of the multiple items of evidence taken from the crime scene or the Cobb vehicle, full steam ahead with this white pickup. Mandan Police Detective Henry gets search warrants. The government said there were 3. There were 4. Search warrants for the pickup, search warrants for his person, search warrant for his business, and search warrant for Dr. Isaak's home. The primary fact in these search warrant applications is that he owns a white Ford pickup with a rust spot. There's several misstatements in the search warrant applications. Law enforcement attempts to show that the person in the McDonald's lot is the person who entered the RJR business and returns to McDonald's to the white pickup. They do not tell the court when they're asking for search warrants that the person in the McDonald's lot is wearing different clothing than the person who is seen entering RJR. They don't tell the court they can't identify the person by age, gender, race, or ethnicity. They don't tell the court that there's not a vehicle license plate, not one letter, not one number. They also don't tell the court that the person leaving RJR is wearing different color clothing than the person they believe is the same person walking on Memorial Highway in their view towards McDonald's. They also don't make it clear in these search warrant applications that there are several time gaps. In addition to the different clothing, that it could easily be a different person, or the suspect could have even gone in a different direction, and the McDonald's pickup might be irrelevant. They also don't tell the court that there's several other people presently unidentified in the area during the relevant times. Finally, they omit relevant information, including the description of the one alleged eyewitness, the McDonald's employee, that the person was 5'8", 5'9". She was interviewed twice and she was explicit on that. Slight to medium build, whereas Chad Isaak, when he was arrested on April 4th, was measured at 6'4" and 220 pounds. Notwithstanding these misstatements in these 4 search warrant applications, law enforcement, Mandan, Mercer County, Crime Bureau, and even federal descend upon Washburn and Dr. Isaak. Before the search warrants are even signed, which was at 4:04 p.m., law enforcement do a felony traffic stop of Dr. Isaak in his vehicle at 3:45. 20 minutes or so before the search warrant are signed. They had been surveilling him at his trailer, watching him, and he normally worked in the afternoons, and he's now driving to work. So the Mercer County deputies, it's their jurisdiction, they do a felony traffic stop. And I don't know how much of that information you will see here, but it's multiple officers pulling their guns and pointing them at the person, get on the ground, get on the ground, get on the ground. He's told to lay on the ground, he's handcuffed, he's searched, and then told he's not under arrest. They don't have an arrest warrant, and they don't have a search warrant. After he's secured and put in the back of a squad car, McLean County deputies do a limited search of his pickup, without gloves, I might add. They then tow his pickup to the McLean County garage, where the Crime Bureau will do a later search of that night on April 4th. Chad is taken to the law enforcement center. Photographs are taken. His clothes are seized down to his underwear. They take fingerprints, they do a buccal swab looking for DNA, and they take fingernail clippings. He's not formally arrested until 7:43, 3 hours after he was removed from his vehicle and his vehicle had been towed. The search warrant that authorized this personal search of his person, where they're seizing all of these items, was issued at 6:32 p.m. because they had amended the search warrants that were initially given at 4 o'clock. Much of the search of his person had occurred before that second search warrant was issued. 22 pieces of evidence were taken from Dr. Isaak, primarily clothing, a buccal swab, fingerprints, and photographs. They search his vehicle from 5 o'clock until 7 o'clock that same day by several Crime Bureau agents at an unsecured McLean County garage. Later that same night, they tow his truck, they put it on a flatbed, and take it to the the BCI offices in Bismarck. From his vehicle, they seize 37 items, various clothing items, 2 face masks, 1 gray, 1 black, a flip phone, and various swabs of possible blood. 5 or 6 of these swabs were from the driver's door, the driver's jamb, or maybe a latch or handle. Another swab is from the passenger's side door, steering wheel, gear selector, etc. They also physically cut 3 or 4 pieces of upholstery from his pickup seats to have that tested as well. And they also seize what they describe as some orange fibers inside a gray face mask. One of the agents doing this pickup search in Mercer County, Agent Sandusky, wore protective gear, but several of the other searchers did not. The house search, keep in mind there's a search warrant for vehicle, person, house, business. The house search is search number 3. That starts at about 8 o'clock and goes till about 11 o'clock. There's at least 7 Crime Bureau agents and other local officers, including Morton County and maybe federal, squeeze into this small trailer home and do a search. There's no booties or protective gear that's used. They seize 38 items, including clothes, 2 face masks, another cell phone, 3 handguns, 3 rifles, 2 had never been fired or were in original wrapping or boxes, some ammunition, a camera, and clothes allegedly in a dryer believed to match the suspects. Orange hooded sweatshirt, a camouflage reversible orange face mask, black pants, and there were multiple other items in the dryer, a black pullover, gray socks, black jacket, and a pair of shoes. They also seized an orange knife with a bent blade, with a pretty short blade, allegedly in the washing machine. And you'll hear testimony about that you'll find interesting. There's multiple other knives seized from his residence as well. And they also seize in his freezer a plastic container with some gun parts. They also seized shoes from Dr. Isaak that he was wearing when he was arrested. And there are several other shoes left and perhaps a couple others seized as well. The business search warrant occurs kind of concurrently with the house search by different agents, and they're at his business for a little over an hour, and 4 or 5 Crime Bureau agents seize 7 items, some ammunition found inside a microwave that he used as storage. It was not functional. In fact, the cord had been cut off and couldn't be used, a couple of pair of shoes, 2 knives, and a computer hard drive from his business. There were 20 other pairs of shoes, Avia shoes, similar to the ones that had been seized, that were left, 20 other knives that were in the kitchen drawer at his work that were left as well. In all, from the crime scene, the autopsies, the Cobb search, and all the searches that occurred on April 4th, 229 items of evidence were seized in all. Most after he was already arrested, and he was arrested before any lab results were completed, any cell tower information was collected. April 5th, murder charges are filed, and in a press release, law enforcement admits they have no known motive. Mandan Police Department discontinues the 24-hour tip line, and they had received over 150 tips, most by April 4th. Tips continued to come in to other agencies over a period of months, but the 24-hour tip line was discontinued. From this point forward, all real efforts are focused on Dr. Chad Isaak, to the point of ignoring other suspects or other theories. So what further investigation do they now do? They're looking for motive or other evidence linking him to the victims, to RJR, but they have confirmation bias. They start by interviewing his patients. They determine through one of these search warrants, or they detect a calendar with a number of patients that he actually worked with on the afternoon of April 1st, the day of the alleged crime. They interview several of these patients. A woman by the name, first name of Paige, said, quote, "seemed the same as always," end quote. A patient by the name of Dora said, quote, "did not seem any different," end quote. Patient by the name of Joseph said, quote, "acted the same as he always did," end quote. And lastly, one patient named Megan said he was, quote, "more relaxed and chatty than normal." These are people in which he provided services to on the afternoon of April 1st. They then went and interviewed all of the neighbors that even knew who he was. They interviewed at least 12 neighbors, some more than once. They didn't discover anything relevant, including motive. Undaunted, they push ahead with additional search warrants, some 10 or more. Recall, his truck had been searched with a search warrant. Truck had also been searched, at least a preliminary search, by the McLean County deputies. They now get a search warrant, which will be search number 3 of his truck. Search warrant on April 8th. Looking for gun parts, and they want to take more photographs and videos of the truck using what they will describe as Blue Star, which is a glorified black light, looking for what they believe to be the presence of blood. They seize nothing in this second search other than taking a photograph or two. They also do a second search warrant of his home. That's also done on April 8th. In this search, they're looking for gun parts. They want more photographs and videos, and they bring with them a dog. A dog specifically trained by ATF. You can call it a gun dog, an explosives dog, a bomb dog, but it's not a drug dog. The quote they use to describe this specially trained dog is, quote, "a single-purpose explosives detention canine," end quote. Specifically trained to find guns, ammunition, etc. They find nothing. They also search the neighboring cemetery where his trailer is next to a cemetery. And they even take the dog downtown Washburn, even though it's not in the search warrant, and walk the explosives dog in front of Dr. Isaak's chiropractic business. That was not in the search warrant. They find nothing. On April 9th, they issue a search warrant for bank records. All of his banking and credit card information, savings, checking, bank records, for both him personally and for his business. They requested records from June 18th through June of 2018 through April of 2019. Nothing relevant is found. They then determine that Dr. Isaak has a Facebook business account, so they get a search warrant for his Facebook business account, looking for pictures, posts, subscriber information, IP addresses, phone numbers, emails, instant messages, comments and videos, and other digital information. They tell the court in the search warrant application that people often use Facebook features such as Messenger to say things they would not say perhaps in a text message or in a cell phone because it would be more personal or threatening. In the application for this Facebook warrant, they tell the court they're looking for motive or relationship with the victims. They also ask the court to seal the search warrant so it wouldn't be available to the public. Nothing relevant is found. Remember the cell tower information. On April 2nd, they made a request to determine which devices could be in the area, and that's done in 2 stages. First, you determine through this first application who had devices in this defined geographical area which is specifically determined by latitude and longitude. And then they send that information, Google will send that information not by name, but only by a number. The second phase of cell tower identification is law enforcement will then look at this anonymous number and determine who on this list, because it could be a very large list, could have been in the relevant areas at the relevant times. And then you have to do a follow-up search warrant to get the names for those people. They're trying to protect our privacy if we're not involved in this sort of thing. So they do the follow-up search warrant after they had done the initial one on April 2nd, on April 15th, and nothing relevant to Dr. Isaak was found. No media devices of his were in the area on April 4th. Undaunted, the search warrant parade continues. Recall that law enforcement seized 2 phones from Dr. Isaak on April 4th. One was a flip phone and one was a smartphone. One was in his residence and one was in his vehicle. The cell phone in the residence was seized as part of the search warrant for the resident. Nothing relevant was found. On May 1st, 2019, law enforcement got a search warrant for his flip phone, looking for photos, emails, contact information, and a generic other information related to criminal activities. They take photographs because they can't download it for some reason of the entire phone, and nothing relevant is found. They also seized from his residence a digital camera. They get a search warrant on May 1st to review the contents of the camera, looking for similar items that they identified in the cell phone search. Nothing relevant is found. Also on May 1st, they have a third search warrant for the day. This one for the computer and/or hard drive for the computer seized at his work. They were looking for information similar to that cited above for the cell phone and camera, and they simply said related to the quadruple homicide, computer search history, etc. Nothing of value was found. On June 25th, they get a search warrant for his personal and business internet and phone information, looking for incoming and outgoing phone calls, email addresses. There's even a false a statement made in the application because he didn't have internet. Nothing of relevance was found. Lastly, on July 9th, they get another search warrant for the flip phone. This time, the search is for the service provider of the cell phone. They alleged in the search warrant application that people often erase information on their cell phones, but it still could be available and retained by the service provider, in this case AT&T, that would have text messages, voicemails, video, photos, and even GPS. Nothing was found. At this point, concurrently with all these search warrants that they're attempting to find motive, they also re-interview a bunch of the RJR employees. They re-interview the senior office personnel, Deanna Finney, the sister of Robert, owner of the building, Ben Pace, the marketing person, and Jackie Faulkner. They can find no motive information from any of them. They also re-interview several of the other RJR employees that were not in management levels. Very few even knew who he was. And those that had any contact with him, like he paid his bill on time, that sort of thing, they had zero issues. Multiple people were shown a photograph of him and a photograph of his vehicle, and nothing was discovered. Well, that brings us to lab results, forensic results. I mentioned that 220 plus items were seized. 3,500 photographs were taken. All the records I mentioned above were seized. What do they show? 3 different labs were used in this case. The state of North Dakota Crime Lab, the federal ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Lab, and a private lab in Florida. Why so many? Well, when one lab was unsuccessful, they often tried another lab. Evidence was delivered, taken back, sent to another lab a couple of times. So let's talk about the evidence that was seized forensically. First was the RJR building. Recall that there were 50 items taken from the RJR building. An additional 56 items were taken during the autopsies. The North Dakota State Crime Lab in Bismarck attempted DNA analysis on all of the swabs that were taken. And they also tried DNA analysis on other items like keys and rings and that sort of thing. In a report sent to law enforcement in August of 2019, 5 months after Dr. Isaak was charged, they finally had some conclusions. There were adequate samples to test several items. Numerous swabs inside of RGR, the south door, the shop floor. There were several physical items, a copper jacket, a wire attached to a ring, a wire attached to a different ring on the shop floor. So they had several items to test, and they obviously had Dr. Isaak's DNA from the search on April 4th. He was excluded. He was not a contributor or potential contributor to any of the swabs. You'll hear a lot of testimony in this trial about DNA language, and you'll determine that there can be a match, and there can be an exclusion, or there can be a middle ground that sometimes says cannot be excluded, but it's not a match or an exclusion. Here, he was excluded. His DNA does not match any of these items that were taken from the RGR business. How about the Cobb pickup search that happened on April 2nd? There were 19 samples taken there from the driver's door armrest, several swabs from the steering wheel, gear selector, pickup keys. Dr. Isaak was excluded. Not satisfied with this result, law enforcement sent a DNA swab from the Cobb pickup steering wheel to a private lab in Florida. Dr. Isaak was excluded. Recall that they also seized fingernails from Dr. Isaak, and they also, when you say fingernails, it's fingernail clippings. They don't pull your fingernails. Fingernail clippings. And they also did the same thing from all 4 victims. No DNA evidence of the victims were on Dr. Isaak's fingernails or his person, and no DNA of Dr. Isaak was found on the victims. There was also no DNA of the victims in Dr. Isaak's home. There was no DNA from the victims in Dr. Isaak's business. There was no DNA or even evidence of blood in any of the clothing items seized from Dr. Isaak's home. And that includes the items taken from the dryer. There was no DNA or blood on any of the knives seized, and not all of it was even tested. Recall that they were looking for fingerprints on the Cobb vehicle and perhaps elsewhere. Nothing was found. Hairs. Hairs, both human and animal, were found throughout the case. DNA testing can be done on hairs to determine whom they belong to. One of the labs advised law enforcement they could do additional testing of hairs. They just had to have more information. It wasn't done. There's no evidence of relevance regarding hairs in this case. How about gun evidence? They seized multiple guns, pistols, rifles, and even a shotgun, and they seized ammunition. Most were not even tested. It's even unclear why they were seized. Apparently, Dr. Isaak, like many in North Dakota, collects guns and gun stuff, including even parts of guns. A microscopic examination by the ATF lab could not conclude that the victims' bullets, the bullets in the victims at RJR, were even fired from the same gun, much less identify the type of gun that fired them. It could have been multiple guns. No bullets found at the scene where the victims were killed match any weapons or guns at Chad's residence. Further, bullets found at the scene could have been fired by over 40, and it could be a larger number, makes and models of guns. So what does the government rely upon here? They're going to talk in this trial about a partial shoe print. Recall at the crime scene the hectic, chaotic scene confronted by poor Mr. Justin Bachheim. He makes the 911 call thinking it's a medical emergency. Everybody responds accordingly. There's 7 or 8 first responders, 5 or 6 employees in the building, 11 or more Mandan police officers before the Crime Bureau shows up. No crime scene precautions were taken initially. Crime Bureau Agent Ahrens noted multiple shoe impressions, both in blood and in broken eggs. Robert Faulkner would bring eggs in for his employees, and when this vicious crime occurred, the eggs spilled all over, and there were egg yolks all over the floor. And so Mr. Ahrens noticed there were multiple shoe impressions, both in blood and broken eggs, and he required law enforcement to try to take photographs of everyone that had been through this crime scene, at least near Robert Faulkner. Some of these photographs, like of the Mandan police officers, weren't taken for 6 weeks later. Mr. Ahrens notes in his report, quote, due to the numerous different shoe impressions from employees, law enforcement, and EMS, agents were unable to determine which shoe impressions were the suspects, end quote. The video that you will see, probably ad nauseum, of the suspect walking in the building shows black footwear. The only eyewitness, if you believe the white truck story, would be Angela Davis at McDonald's. She clearly recalls seeing boots. Law enforcement, in their initial BOLO, be on the lookout, reiterated in BOLO number 2, said the suspect had the number 95 on them. Law enforcement seized boots and shoes from Dr. Isaak, trying to get something to match. There's no number 95 on any of them. And keep in mind, during those early stages of the investigation, law enforcement had taken photographs of many shoe boot prints outside of RJR. But after Dr. Isaac's arrest, there was no attempt to identify the source of those footprints. Now, law enforcement and the government will make some attempt to show a very faint, single left shoe print found at the crime scene may match an old shoe of Dr. Isaak. There's no blood found on this shoe, just a faint, partial imprint, which frankly won't impress you, despite all the high-tech efforts to do so. The conclusion by the expert is it could have been this shoe, or could have been a shoe made by the same company. There's no blood found on the footwear seized or on the clothes seized at Dr. Isaak's. And the government withdrew their request to test for DNA on the shoe. Orange fibers or trace evidence will be something else that you will see in this trial. Recall that law enforcement seized orange fibers from various places, and later they seized a blue fiber or a maroon fiber, and at some point even tried to compare carpet samples. The experts that reviewed this will have to be honest, and they cannot conclude that an orange fiber here is the same as an orange fiber there. The default language is, quote, could have come from, end quote, or, quote, from another item with all the same characteristics, end quote. All the clothing items here seized are commercially made, manufactured items, sweatshirts, t-shirts, face masks, available in multiple stores locally or online, and frankly found in most closets in North Dakota. The carpet samples perhaps could be a little bit more distinctive than a clothing fiber, but when they attempted to compare carpet fibers, Dr. Isaak was excluded. Recall that they seized several swabs from Dr. Isaak's truck. They even took pieces of upholstery, among other things. Recall that there were multiple searches of the pickup at various times and locations by different people, and they took multiple swabs. Most of the swabs disclosed nothing of evidentiary value. In the driver's door jamb, there was a swab, in which the evidence technician will conclude Robert Faulkner could not be excluded. They didn't say a match, said could not be excluded as a contributor. They also said on that same swab, which was a mixture swab, that Lois Cobb could not be excluded as a contributor. There's another swab from the black latch on his pickup that could not be tested because it didn't meet the minimum quantitative thresholds. The last swab from a black latch, they actually took the latch of his pickup off and sent that in, could also not exclude Robert and Lois as contributors. Again, no match. There will be a lot of testimony in this case about DNA mixtures and what this means and what it does not mean. There also likely will be testimony about contamination of evidence, and the photographs and video and other evidence will show you how small these swabs really are. Pay close attention to how the evidence in this case was handled. And the conclusions reached on the DNA from Dr. Isaak's pickup does not state that DNA for the victims were present, only that they could not be excluded. Lastly is the clothing at the residence. In the dryer was an orange sweatshirt. If you look closely at the evidence in this case, you will say that the photos of the person at the crime scene will show a much heavier coat, and the face mask will have different colors around the neck and the eye slits. In other words, the clothing does not match. Further, there was no blood on the clothing at all taken from Dr. Isaak's. There was no DNA anywhere in the residence. Owning an orange sweatshirt or an orange face mask does not make someone a murderer. What did law enforcement ignore in their pursuit of their confirmation bias that this was Dr. Isaak and perhaps not someone else? There were seen witnesses, multiple people walking on Memorial Highway. They make no attempt to identify them. And the witnesses they do find, Josh Olson and David Miller, are not even on their witness list. There's other white trucks. Several tips come in from multiple people independently. They don't know one another. Come in on this tip line regarding seeing white trucks in the area before the crime. There's no attempt to investigate those in any detail. Mitch Kessel, this was the employee with a different employee that was seen running from the scene when all the RGR employees were supposed to stay and be interviewed on April 1st. He had a white Ford pickup of the same vintage in question. This wasn't discovered by law enforcement, even though he fled from the scene the morning of the crime and had to be detained. There's nothing in the discovery indicating that he's ever been asked about his truck. Other evidence. Law enforcement even ignored relevant evidence near the crime scene. On July 2nd, several months after Dr. Isaak was arrested, RGR employees find a bullet, an intact bullet, in a gravel area near RJR. So they thought this might be relevant to the crime that happened, a bullet. Law enforcement takes the bullet, but they don't test it or investigate further because it didn't match any evidence they had seized from Dr. Isaak. Other tips had come in, and very few were followed up on in any detail. Other people with motive. Recall the list of angry residents. BCI did no follow-up here. They did assign some follow-up to the Mandan Police Department. There were some half-hearted interviews in the fall of 2019, but nothing substantive. Only a fraction of the people on the list were even called. Most could not be located or interviewed. Same thing with disgruntled employees. Robert's affair. Lisa Nelson's violent ex-spouse, to my knowledge, was not located, much less interviewed. And when Jackie was asked about the affair, law enforcement assured her they were only asking the questions because, quote, defense attorneys will ask these questions if we don't look into this, end quote, not pursued. Law enforcement believed that they solved this case in 4 days, and they spent many months trying to prove that they were right. They weren't. They simply confirmed what they believed, and they ignored the rest. At the conclusion of this trial, I'm going to appear before you again and ask that you find Dr. Isaak not guilty of all charges. Thank you.